New Year's morning, streets pristine, bathed in pale sunlight. A disabled hypercar flashed its warning lights on the emergency lane. Billionaire Lara Thorne stepped out, impeccable, phone tight, sharp with impatience. Her meticulously planned schedule, packed with high-stakes calls, was collapsing. An old dented utility truck pulled over. Single dad and mechanic Daniel emerged in a simple work jacket. She cast a quick, dismissive glance. "I've already called professionals," she clipped. Daniel nodded, acknowledged the rejection, and turned to leave. The hypercar's cooling system emitted a high-pitched anomaly. Daniel froze, listening to the engine's dying whisper. A new year began with a roadside failure that would redefine competence. Lara Thorne managed her life with the iron fist of a general. Every minute was accounted for, every decision quantified. Her enormous wealth was merely the tool she deployed to guarantee absolute control. Her custom-built hypercar, now a gorgeous, multi-million-dollar monument to failure, was supposed to transport her to a pivotal global conference call, a call that would set the tone for her year. The breakdown felt like a personal betrayal by technology. Lara's disdain wasn't directed at the car, but at the delay. She despised inefficiency and anything that moved outside her meticulous schedule. For a person of her stature, inefficiency was a moral failing. Within seconds of the car stalling, she had executed her protocol: assistant, insurance, elite recovery. Her team was paid to solve problems before they became hers, insulating her from the messy reality of mechanical breakdown. The issue, she realized with mounting frustration, was time. The elite recovery team was 90 minutes away, caught in unexpected holiday routing. Time, the one resource she couldn't buy back, was slipping away, and with it, her perfect control over the start of her business year. She paced the emergency lane, her high-end leather shoes pristine against the cold asphalt, feeling the silent judgment of every passing vehicle. She was undeniably vulnerable. Daniel, a single father of a 7-year-old girl, lived by a different kind of precision, the ruthless discipline required to balance work, school runs, and a tight budget. His freelance mechanic business relied solely on word of mouth and the integrity of his work. He kept no signage. His reputation was his business plan, built on reliability and honest pricing. Every morning, no matter the day, he checked his own truck meticulously, not because he had to, but because he believed in proactive maintenance. He treated machines with respect, understanding that they were only as good as the care they received. Seeing the hypercar, he hadn't seen a rich woman in trouble. He'd seen a fellow traveler with a complex mechanical issue that could escalate quickly. His moral code was simple. If he could help without major disruption to his own tightly managed schedule, he would. He approached Lara, his movements economical, his eyes scanning the car for obvious signs of external damage or fluid leaks. He saw the exasperation etched on her elegant face, the telltale sign of an executive who has lost her leverage. "Morning," he offered, his voice calm, projecting a sense of grounded utility. "Looks like a serious electrical issue, maybe a sensor failure locking the engine down." Lara, already on the phone with her vice president discussing Plan B, waved him away with a flick of her wrist. The gesture was dismissive, almost dehumanizing, treating him as a bothersome distraction. "Irma, I told you I've called the professionals," she repeated curtly, her gaze already back on her phone screen. Her trust was reserved for branded solutions, often confusing price tags with genuine expertise. Daniel simply nodded, understanding the hierarchy being enforced. He knew the look, the silent judgment that lumped him in with every unreliable roadside amateur trying to make a quick, inflated dollar off desperation. As he walked back to his truck, the engine of the hypercar made that tiny, almost inaudible click-hiss-click noise, a subtle irregularity in the residual warmth of the stalled engine. It was a noise of pressure equalization gone wrong, a sign of thermal stress. Daniel, with his mechanic's intuition honed by years of listening to struggling machinery, froze instantly. He wasn't trained on this specific model, a bespoke V12 engine, but he understood the universal language of heat and pressure, buildup in confined systems. Spoken, that sound signaled a failure not of the primary engine, but of a secondary fluid management system. A much faster, more catastrophic potential failure if the engine was restarted or even left to cook in its own residual heat. He walked back, not challenging her authority, but offering a factual warning. "Ma'am, I don't know this car's schematics, but something in your fluid line is about to pop. You need to vent the pressure or you'll have a fire risk before rescue gets here." His tone lacked judgment or self-promotion. It was pure technical advice, delivered out of immediate necessity. The urgency was for the machine's survival, not his own gain. Ilara finally lowered the phone, looking at him with suspicion that bordered on contempt. She was used to people trying to upsell her, not warn her about imminent danger to her property. "How could you possibly know that from here? Are you speculating?" she demanded, the doubt sharp and cutting. Daniel simply pointed at a tiny, almost invisible plume of vapor escaping from a seam near the rear wheel arch. A minuscule detail that her eye, trained on global markets and 5-year forecasts, was completely blind to. "I don't need a diagnostic computer for thermal dynamics. It's what you hear, what you smell, and what you notice. That system is compromised, and the clock is ticking on a thermal incident." He didn't wait for permission. He had offered the information and respected her choice to ignore it. He gave her one last focused look, a look that communicated, "Trust your eyes, not your ego," and finally retreated to his own vehicle. He opened his door, ready to leave, but he stayed parked, waiting. Ilara stared at the wisp of steam, which now seemed to carry the smell of something metallic and hot. She realized that her multi-million-dollar problem might soon become a multi-million-dollar fire. Her day, defined by absolute control, was now dangerously close to chaos, and her reliance on branded professionals had just failed its first test of the year. The reality of the situation hit Ilara hard. The elite recovery service was now reporting an additional hour's delay due to a major holiday incident. They were stuck miles away, hampered by the very traffic they usually bypassed. On the dashboard, the engine's residual temperature was climbing into the red zone, the spike anomalous and alarming. Her carefully managed panic began to surface, manifesting as frantic, unsuccessful phone calls. She was caught in a gilded cage. Her wealth guaranteed her access to the best, but stranded her when the complex system failed unpredictably. Her vital conference call with her Asia team was now 15 minutes away, a non-negotiable window for a crucial merger decision that depended on precise timing and her direct authority. Her anxiety was visible, a frantic energy as she paced, clutching her phone. She hated the feeling of being helpless, a sensation her wealth was supposed to have eradicated. She risked starting the car to move it to a safer location, but the thought of the small steam plume and Daniel's concise warning paralyzed her. The fear of a spectacular public failure outweighed her need for speed. Daniel, who had been sitting calmly in his truck checking his daughter's homework planner, emerged again. He hadn't left, recognizing her immediate danger. He approached her, holding a simple but high-quality thermal imaging pocket device. He was there to solve a machine's problem, not her social one. "The risk is real," Daniel stated, showing the thermal device. The screen glowed red with localized hotspots. "It's a specific valve overheating, a common flaw when primary cooling fails. Your recovery team won't know this. They're just haulers. Internal pressure won't allow it to cool normally." He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who deals in facts, not persuasion. He presented data that contradicted the vehicle's own internal diagnostics. Ilara stared at his simple appearance, a man in a worn jacket, his hands calloused, and her corporate instinct rebelled against the visual evidence. "This isn't a roadside fix, mister?" she asked, leaving the name blank as a subtle put-down, challenging his credentials. "Daniel, and I agree. It's an engineered problem, and it requires an understanding of why the engineers overlooked the thermal expansion in this specific alloy. It's a design flaw that only reveals itself under high stress, like your system just experienced. He didn't argue about his capability. He argued about the nature of the problem and her impending loss of control. His calm, data-driven assessment, backed by the thermal camera, was more convincing than her assistant's frantic, distant assurances. I don't need to tow it. I need 10 minutes to stabilize the line and vent the pressure safely. I guarantee no further damage. If I fail, you owe me nothing. If I succeed, you can make your call on time. Sin no. The mention of the fire risk and the rapidly decreasing time to her critical call was the final leverage. Ilara realized she was trading her corporate ego for immediate disaster avoidance and the salvation of her schedule. She grudgingly agreed, her voice tight with reluctance. 10 minutes. Do not touch anything you cannot reverse. If you damage anything, my insurance team will be in contact. She tried one final attempt to reassert control. Daniel merely nodded, accepting the threat as a formal necessity. Understood. Risk management is part of the job. She stood back, watching him, her skepticism heavy. Her inner monologue raged against the absurdity of entrusting her multi-million-dollar asset to a stranger she'd met on the side of the road on New Year's Day. The entire situation was a violation of her principles of control and delegation. Daniel moved with a practiced, fluid grace. He wasn't rushed, but he wasn't slow. He opened the engine bay, a terrifyingly complex landscape of carbon fiber and polished metal. He ignored the main computer terminal entirely, focusing instead on the dense network of tubes and hoses. He knew the software was lying. He had to trust the hardware. He pulled out a small, almost surgical kit from his truck, a kit that looked primitive compared to the diagnostic gear Ilara expected. It contained specialized tools designed for access in impossibly tight spaces. Onlookers, drivers passing slowly by, strained their necks to see the spectacle, the epitome of luxury being worked on by a man in a beat-up truck. The atmosphere was thick with scrutiny and suppressed gossip. Ilara paced 5 feet away, her eyes flicking between Daniel's hands and the countdown on her phone. She was gambling her reputation and her day on a man she had dismissed minutes ago. The tension was almost unbearable. He was now deep in the engine bay, his face focused, blocking out the noise of the traffic in Ilara's presence. He was listening intently, touching the lines with the reverence of a doctor assessing a pulse, looking for the telltale vibration of a component struggling against an internal blockage. He located the failing element, a tiny, almost inaccessible sensor relay that had expanded due to the overheating fluid pressure. It wasn't broken, it was jammed, locked tight by thermal expansion in a component that shouldn't have been there. The diagnostic system couldn't see it because the primary computer was compensating for the failure it could detect. He reached for a non-conductive, specialized high-temperature tape from his kit, a low-tech but precise solution to a high-tech problem. The material was designed to create a momentary, flexible seal. He carefully taped the relay, applying measured pressure to create a temporary shim, allowing the pressure to vent correctly without a secondary failure. It was a crucial adjustment requiring knowledge and dexterity. He stepped back, wiping his hands on a clean rag from his pocket. He looked at Ilara, whose face was a mixture of impatience and profound dread. Done. Try the ignition now, but only briefly. The pressure is safe, but the main issue is still there. You can start the engine for a minute or two to move it safely, but then shut it down. Ilara hesitated. This was the moment of truth, the test of her judgment. She took a deep breath, the smell of burnt oil and cold metal suddenly overpowering. She held the key, her thumb poised over the start button. The seconds stretched into an eternity. If you'd like to see how this moment unfolds, you're welcome to subscribe and continue with us. Ilara inserted the key, her hand steady, but her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed the ignition. The hypercar roared to life with a choked, unstable sound. She immediately shut it off, but in that split second, the difference was clear. The violent, abnormal pressure reading on the dashboard had vanished. The engine was under thermal control, stabilized by Daniel's quick fix. Twist 1, the skill revelation. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. See? Pressure's vented. The error is isolated now. You can move the car 50 yards onto the shoulder for safety, but don't drive it. He explained his process, speaking in simple, undeniable engineering terms. The main computer was fed bad data by the failing sensor. It compensated by overpressurizing the secondary line. I didn't fix the sensor. I fixed the sensor's environment, forcing the fluid path to open safely. Array, he hadn't used a single piece of cutting-edge technology, no laptop, no code, no diagnostic port. His tools were his eyes, his ears, and his profound knowledge of fundamental physics and material science. This was a revelation for Ilara, who was accustomed to solving problems by deploying the most expensive software in the largest team. Daniel used quiet, focused common sense, leveraging a small piece of technical knowledge no one else possessed. Ilara was utterly silenced. The complexity of the car was a wall designed to keep amateurs out. Daniel had seen the fatal, human-made flaw in the brickwork. She felt a profound wave of respect and professional humiliation wash over her. She was defeated not by intelligence but by superior focus and contextual knowledge. She had paid millions for people who could talk about systemic risk management. But here was a man who could manage a multi-million-dollar asset's immediate crisis with a piece of tape and 10 minutes of absolute concentration. She saw the difference between theoretical knowledge and applied competence. Ilara moved the car onto the safest part of the shoulder, parked it, and returned to Daniel, her expensive attire feeling heavy and performative compared to his practical simplicity. She felt stripped bare of her usual defenses. She sat on the hood of his old truck, a strange image of wealth-embracing utility. "Tell me about the design flaw," she ordered, her tone now that of a student seeking genuine knowledge, not a patron demanding service. Twist 2. The truth behind the fix. Daniel knelt, pointing to the barely visible serial number on the line he'd worked on. That serial number, ending in 7A, that batch of alloy had a known coefficient of thermal expansion issue under intense compression. It's documented in niche mechanical forms. The engineers fixed it in the next batch, but every 7A will fail eventually in the same way. The only way to spot it before the crash is to listen to the sound of the cooling system, the abnormal venting pressure, not the data readout that is reading the symptom, not the cause. He paused, his gaze meeting hers, delivering the final, crushing insight. "Your money bought you the car, Ms. Thorne, but it didn't buy you the information required to keep it alive. It only bought you the report that the system failed, which came too late." He articulated the concept of information asymmetry in complexity. The more layers of technology and luxury you add, the further you get from the simple, physical truth of a failure. Ilara processed the comment. It wasn't meant to wound, but to educate. He had identified the blind spot in her entire operation, relying on reports and proxies instead of raw, human contextual data. She spent her life reading market charts, not listening to the sound of the business. She realized that Daniel was not just a mechanic. He was an expert in forensic execution analysis. He understood failure at the molecular level, not just the financial one. The tension in the air was palpable, thicker than the traffic noise. The onlookers, sensing the magnitude of the exchange, had stopped passing quickly. They were spectators to a power shift, a billionaire having her entire worldview corrected by a man she had ignored. The realization was profound. Daniel succeeded because necessity forced him to deal directly with root causes, never symptoms. He couldn't afford a middleman. Ilara pulled out her phone, ready to offer a stunning sum, but Daniel simply smiled slightly. "I told you I only charge for results. The pressure is safe. Now let's get you ready for your call." He moved back to her open door, retrieving a small, battery-powered signal booster. "The signal here is weak, but this booster will give you a clear line for your call. I use it for my daughter's online tutoring. You have 7 minutes until your meeting." He placed the booster on the roof of her hypercar, a final absurd juxtaposition of high-tech wealth and low-tech, reliable problem-solving. Daniel was not asking for payment. He was providing an integrated service of real competence. Mechanical, logistical, and communicative. He was solving her problem, not just the car's. Ilara, finally taking her seat inside the car, felt a profound, unprecedented shift in her posture. She was late, her car was broken, but she had never felt more alert. Ilara finished her conference call, a crucial, successful negotiation made possible by the clear signal Daniel had provided. The feeling of victory was tempered by an overwhelming sense of obligation and deep reflection on her earlier prejudice. She took a full minute, allowing the silence of the car to envelop her, before she opened the door. She felt the chill of the morning air, but the cold clarity of the lesson was sharper. She looked at Daniel, who was quietly gathering his tools, giving her the space she needed, completely uninterested in the outcome of her multi-million-dollar deal. The apology. Ilara walked toward him, her tone completely stripped of its corporate edge. Daniel, I owe you a sincere apology. I judged you based on a superficial assessment of what competence should look like. The branding, the suit, the title. I was wrong, completely and profoundly wrong. This apology was painful for her. Ilara Thorne never apologized, she issued mandates. This was an admission of a flaw in her own operational philosophy. Daniel met her apology with simple grace. It's New Year's, ma'am. Everyone gets a fresh start, sometimes by force. I'm just glad the car is safe. The question, Ilara's question, was genuine. Why did you stop? Why did you give me the warning when I had already dismissed you and you knew I wouldn't pay you what you're worth? The answer. Daniel looked out at the clean, quiet highway. It was the right thing. It's what I teach my daughter. You don't ignore a fire risk, just like you don't ignore a problem you can solve. Simple as that. The reward is a clean conscience, which is a payment I can always afford. Ilara's usual method of showing gratitude was transactional. She pulled out her checkbook, ready to write a stunning, compensatory sum, something that would solve Daniel's financial pressures for a year. The refusal. Daniel gently placed his hand on the checkbook, stopping her. The fee is $150 for the diagnosis and pressure relief, plus $20 for the tape. That's the cost. No more. But you saved my call, my schedule, potentially my car, and my reputation, Ilara insisted, trying to force the transaction. I charge you for the work, not the panic, Ms. Thorne, Daniel replied, his dignity unassailable. If I take more, it makes me no different than the people who overcharge you for doing less. I value my integrity more than your gratitude. Keep your money and spend it on people who can teach you how to avoid the next breakdown. Ilara, completely unaccustomed to such rejection of easy money, felt a profound shift. His refusal was more powerful than any acceptance. He was, in effect, setting a price on her morality, and the price was a refusal of corruption. She paid him the precise amount in cash, watching him count the bills with careful respect, not for the money, but for the integrity of the transaction itself. Change in perspective. She looked at her remaining schedule. She was 45 minutes late, yet she felt a surprising lack of anger. The delay had been an investment in self-correction. She realized that her reliance on speed had blinded her to execution. The decision. She pulled out her phone and canceled her next minor but stressful meeting with a junior executive. She needed time to sit, breathe, and genuinely think about what Daniel had shown her. She realized the start of her year wouldn't be defined by the merger she just closed, but by the quiet lessons she received on the side of the road. A decision had been made. She needed to learn more about the man who valued his time and integrity over her unlimited checkbook, and she needed to expose her team to his philosophy. A few weeks later, Ilara's hypercar was back in her garage, the specific 7A part replaced by the specialist Daniel had recommended. She was driving her common SUV, stripped of its chauffeur, having learned the value of blending in. She was in a quiet, unmarked industrial park, following the simple text-based directions Daniel had used for his service calls. She found his small, extremely clean workshop. No signage, just a man, covered in grease, working patiently on an old sedan engine, using his hands and listening intently. She walked in, deliberately unannounced and alone, wearing business casual attire, a concession to the environment. Daniel looked up, registering her presence with only a slight nod. Ms. Thorne, I trust the new 7B part is holding up? Perfectly, but my team's operations are not, she stated, her tone serious. Competence troubles, remember? The proposal. She proposed a new kind of partnership, not a job, but a high-level, unique contract, not to fix cars, but to embed within her executive team for 6 months to teach them his methodology of operational blind spots and forensic execution analysis. I want you to show my people how to listen to the sound of the cooling system, not just the data readouts. I want execution, not presentation. Crucially, she emphasized, total respect for your expertise. No micromanagement. Your schedule is yours. You report only to me on the friction you identify. I will give you the authority to cut the friction you find. This was the ultimate concession of power. Daniel paused, looking at his hands, then at her. He recognized the sincerity of the offer and the genuine willingness to share control. This was not about charity, it was about genuine respect for his unique expertise. The terms. He agreed, but with non-negotiable conditions. My consulting work must take priority over all corporate distractions, no unnecessary meetings. I will set my own hours, and the only thing that supersedes that is my daughter's schedule. School plays, appointments, homework. That is non-negotiable. Ilara offered a rare, genuine smile. Deal. That level of focus is exactly what I'm paying for, and I look forward to seeing the invoices for your daughter's dental visits. Daniel's life gained a new, stable dimension, yet his nature remained unchanged. He still drove his beat-up truck, still kept his small garage for the local customers he cared about, and still focused on his craft and his daughter above all else. He was a consultant to a billionaire, but fundamentally he remained a disciplined, single dad. Ilara began her year not with a triumphant merger announcement, but with a profound internal lesson. The most valuable investment wasn't in the next acquisition, but in the humility to recognize expertise outside of her rarefied world, and the willingness to give power to the most honest, least self-promoting person she'd ever met. She realized that true lasting change didn't come from the velocity of her wealth, but from the simple human act of stopping, listening, and valuing a man who knew the cost of every single part and the dignity of every single interaction. She had paid a roadside mechanic $175, and in return, she had bought back the clarity and integrity of her entire corporate philosophy. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe. Sometimes the year changes when you slow down.